Hello and welcome back to the EduPulse podcast. In this episode, we'll be talking about how to effectively plan for misconceptions in your lessons to get the best out of your students with handy hints, tips and techniques. So sit back and enjoy 40 minutes of the EduPulse podcast. Good morning, mate. Welcome back.
Morning. How are you?
Yeah, very good, thank you. Well, it doesn't matter for those out there in podcast listening world, but it's Sunday morning. You're back off a week's residential with year 6. How are you feeling?
Tired. It was a brilliant week, absolutely brilliant week, but one of those that's just, you just don't sleep, do you? You literally just don't sleep.
It's one of those as well where you kind of get back and the parents go, "Did you have a nice time?" Or maybe some of your non-teaching colleagues might go, "Did you have a nice holiday?" And you just have to look at them with that steely look in your eye and be like, "Don't talk to me for a while. I need to sleep."
Yeah, exactly. It was nice. We had like a little WhatsApp group while we were on the residential, and everyone was posting pictures of what their partners had done for them when they got home. So like, my partner got me flowers and had dinner ready, and another one was like, they'd ordered Domino's and it was on the table, and my wife was just like, "You might want to pick up a pizza on the way home because I didn't think to get you anything."
Brilliant. It's just, listen, you spend a week on cloud 9 in the residential world, and then you slam back down to earth.
Yeah.
So we thought we'd gather this morning and chat about misconceptions in the classroom, which I think is a great place to go to, because your impact article, which was released recently, and for those out there listening, that's the Journal for the Charter College of Teaching. Adam and I are both very proud fellows, and actually this is our first peer-reviewed publication, isn't it, that we both had articles in?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, because we both ended up with articles fortunately published in the last edition, didn't we? Which was great. And like, I think anybody as well, any of our ITT and ECTs that are listening along, join the Charter College. It's absolutely brilliant. It will give you access to some of the best ongoing CPD out there. Some great messages coming out from them, and some great people running the organisation as well. So definitely well worth joining.
Yeah, absolutely. Maybe we'll grab somebody on from the Charter College at some point and have a bit of a chat with them and prove to everyone what a good organisation it is. I think the reason why I mention that is because this morning your article's been doing a bit of the rounds on social media, and one of the things you were talking about in there, in terms of looking at assessment in the classroom, is you kind of had a big shift in your school away from kind of assessment per se and more looking at misconceptions. And I just think it's a really refreshing way of doing it, and lots of other people are beginning to kind of jump on that bandwagon. So do you think that's a good place to start chatting about misconception in the classroom?
Yeah, 100%. I think that, the biggest thing with it is like with misconceptions is it's about a mindset shift. So like, the temptation is when you're teaching to kind of like ask a question or do a bit of teaching and then check kids' understanding, and then the temptation is to look for all of the right answers, because there's something like quite affirming about that, isn't there? Like, if you've got 30 kids in the class and 26 of them have all got the right answer after you've just taught them something, like that's quite affirming that you've done an okay job there, because lots of the kids have got the answer right and seem to be understanding. But I think it's about a mindset shift, in that actually the thing that's most important to you, the thing that's most informative, and the thing that's probably going to help you know what to do next is the 4 kids that have got it wrong, and trying to work out what their misconceptions are, because it could well be that in a class of 30 and you've got 4 that have got the right answer, you could well have 4 completely different misconceptions there. You could also even have some misconceptions that are kind of buried away within the right answers as well, which I think we're going to come to a little bit later on. But yeah, definitely, I think misconceptions are absolutely worth our time thinking about. But I think overall it requires a different mindset to kind of hunt down those misconceptions and really have that mindset of looking for them and seeing the value in those misconceptions, rather than what seems sort of comfortable and nice intuitively, which is to look for all the right answers.
Yeah, because just because it feels good, or just because you think there's a good result coming from it, that doesn't speak to its efficacy in any way, shape or form, does it? A bit like the use of coloured overlays for dyslexia, just because it feels good, there's such a lack of evidence over its efficacy that kind of there's no correlation between the two. So you guide us through this. Where's a good place to start when we're thinking about addressing misconceptions in our classroom?
I guess like like it seems sensible. You would kind of start with like, why is it important to think about misconceptions, and why is it kind of worth our time? And I think there's loads of reasons why, but I think there's probably four really, really strong reasons why misconceptions are worth our time, or certainly like four that we've come up with for the purpose of this as well. So if people are listening along and they can think of others, that's brilliant. Like, join the conversation and add those to it. But our sort of four that we've come up with anyway. So the first one is that like learning's invisible. So learning is taking place in the minds of children, right? So it's all about their change to long-term memory. In our opinion, I know that's disputed, but if you assume that learning is a change to long-term memory, or must include a change to long-term memory, it's all going on inside their heads. It's all completely invisible. So therefore, you don't know at any given time what they know and what they don't know. So that's one reason why it's really important to kind of dig into what it is that they don't know, and work really hard to try and reveal what they don't know, and really hard to reveal their misconception, because ultimately you're not going to see it any other way unless you look for it, and unless you try and elicit information and evidence of what kids are thinking, and therefore evidence of where they're thinking things are, or thinking about things in a way that's not correct and not accurate.
Is there a chance there to give a throwback to a previous episode with David Didow?
Yeah, definitely go for it.
With David, we were discussing curriculum, but certainly David Didow is one of the more prominent voices when it comes to, if you happen to Google learning is invisible, he's going to come up first. Hattie as well spoke about that, making the invisible visible, and how do you know that what you have taught has been learnt? And if we're saying here, I think it's okay to put our flag in the flag in the mast. It's Sunday morning, Adam. To put our flag onto the mast, then I haven't seen anything that would convince me otherwise that learning is a change to long-term memory.
Yeah,
I'm just going to be bold and put that out there.
Yeah, nice. Yeah, I think as well, it's one of those that's like a real sort of, I've heard some people use the phrase pain point recently. I think it is a real pain point for teachers, where you feel like something's gone really, really well in the moment, in the lesson, and then you have that ultimate deflation like 2 or 3 weeks later, where you test it or where you revisit it, and it feels like it's been completely misunderstood. So not necessarily forgotten, and that's a real pain point as well, but where you feel like something, like they really understood this particular concept that you taught, and then you test it 2 or 3 weeks later or come back to it, and they've completely got the wrong end of the stick, and you realise that actually all along you thought they'd understood, but oh no, they hadn't. There was a subtle misconception in there that you'd missed at the time. And I think again that's why it's so important to have that attitude of, right, let's dig for those misconceptions, let's find them, because if they're there, I'm not gonna miss them. Because otherwise, yeah, you if you don't do that, you can end up with that pain point of 2 or 3 weeks down the line, ending up with discovering a misconception that you had no idea was there, and then you kind of feel like you've wasted some of your time.
Well, I think it was Daniel Willingham who said something to do with like the curse of recency. Don't be fooled by, that kind of the proficiency that you see almost immediately, and the curse of recency, and just being like, I've done it, they've got it, they've just answered 40 questions on it, which Sheraton speaks about that task completion being a poor proxy for learning. But we're also time poor, that you teach a concept, they smash out a load of questions on it, they've got every question right, excellent, let's move on. And if you haven't built in, as per last episode, if you haven't built in those moments for retrieval, or you haven't built in learning for understanding, and then where you're coming from today within that planning to look for misconceptions, you are going to have that, did you call it a pain point?
Yeah, that's definitely not my term, but it's someone else's, but I really like it. I can't remember who it was that said that to me. But yeah, it's definitely not mine.
No. Listen, sometimes you kind of find yourself coming up with these phrases and you don't know whether you heard them before, which is why I try and remember as many people as possible, having said something, just so we credit the right people.
Yeah, totally. I think that like the point that you're making really well there is that like performance and learning are different, and so what you actually see in the moment of a lesson or immediately after teaching is likely to be performance rather than learning. And again, that then comes back to this idea that the learning is actually invisible, and so even if someone appears to have got something, it's still worth really digging down deeply to make sure that their reasoning and their method for getting to that point is accurate. Otherwise, that in itself could be concealing a misconception. I guess that's probably like the second reason that we came up with around why misconceptions are worth our time, because it's really, really easy for a misconception to be concealed within a right answer. And so you've got to do that digging. So like, as an example, if you were to do let's do a maths example, right? Because we did a load of English ones last time. So if you were to do like a third add 2/5, and that would be like 11/15. That would be 11/15. So that is the correct answer. And if you look at a child, and maybe they've put on their mini whiteboard and they've got that right answer, there's a chance that what they've done there is they've spotted that the lowest common multiple of 3 and 5 is 15, and so they have to convert the denominators into 15s. And there's a chance that they spotted that and they've used their knowledge of their fluent recall of the 3 and 5 times table to know that the lowest common multiple is 15, and that's what you want. But there's also a chance that they've just gone, right, when I'm adding fractions, I just multiply together the two denominators. So I'll just multiply together 3 and 5, and that makes 15. So they've ended up with the right, those two children there could have ended up with exactly the same correct answer, but one of them has got that misconception that when you're adding fractions, you just multiply together the two denominators. Now, that's not going to reveal itself until you do something like 6 add 8, and they come up with 48, but actually the lower multiple of 6 and 8 is 24. So it's really, really easy to have a misconception concealed within a right answer. So actually looking just for the right answers is also probably not a deep enough dig to reveal the misconceptions that are out there. And it's just really important, I think, particularly early on in your career, to make sure that you don't fall into that trap of having of letting misconceptions hide behind right answers.
Yeah, I kind of come across this particularly in maths with the primary element of my school, trying to convince them to show they're working out. So kind of bear with me on that, but like I have a couple of students who are computers. Their brain just does it, and coupled with a bit of neurodiversity, they cannot see the point in show me the working out. There's the answer. I'm not going to show you the method. I've already done it in my head. What's the point? Which is a very real conversation and a conversation that I know happens up and down the country. And trying to convince them that actually, I've kind of just defaulted to going, if I can see you've done the right method, I might be giving you a mark, even if the answer's wrong. Because, certainly as you head up further in the school, there's the possibility for those if you're kind of doing internal assessments and whatnot. Because it's really difficult to turn around to a 10-year-old and say, I'm digging for your misconceptions. I'm sure there's a way around that. But as I say, time poor, trying to think about it, you're faced against this blockade, this logical blockade. Like, I've done it in my head. Why do I need? And actually, maybe a method of everybody, we call it SIWO in my school, show you're working out. I do a double clap and go, SIWO, because they don't like when they show me they're working out, and I come around and make sure they've done it. And listen, there's many different ways of getting there, getting to the answer, and it's important to support that. But I like that idea of misconceptions hiding inside correct answers.
Well, we like at my place, we talk a lot about right answer for wrong reason, or right answer for the right reason with the kids. So we'll say, if someone was to do that, and I think there's a big argument as well for like, if a kid knows the answer and you're confident that they know the answer for the right reason, like that's fine. But yeah, if I really wanted to be, if I wanted to dig in and find out if that answer is hiding a misconception, I'll say to the kids, right, I want to know if you've got the right answer for the right reason or the right answer for the wrong reason. And they know what that means, and so it's all about that kind of classroom culture that you build up, I guess, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. Does this kind of feed neatly into the fact of how important these misconception moments are? Because as a teacher, when you discover them, that becomes a catalyst, right? That becomes a moment for you to decide what to do next. It becomes like, I want to say a hinge point, but we've got the word hinge and hinge questions, but it's kind of the same idea, isn't it? That we've come to let's do one for the comic book fans. We've come to a nexus point. You now have some of the class answering correctly for the right reasons, some of the class answering correctly for the wrong reasons, and some of them not getting it right at all. So with this knowledge of misconceptions, what can you do with it?
Yeah, so I think that's the third reason, I guess, why misconceptions are worth our time thinking about, because ultimately they dictate what you do next. So to kind of drill it down to some fairly simple and straightforward possibilities. So you can either crack on and go, okay, there's a misconception there, but actually it's not that important, or it's so important that I'm going to come back to it later. I'm gonna crack on and teach the next bit of the lesson. So it's pretty rare that would happen, I guess, but but it is an option.
Mm-hmm.
You can completely reteach it, so you can go, actually, yeah, this misconception is really really broad and wide, and so this makes sense that I would reteach this whole thing. So I'm going to do that again now, and maybe I'm going to model it in a slightly different way, or I'm going to get kids' attention to zoom in on the specific part of this concept that the misconception concerns. And so we're really going to zoom in on that bit, address that misconception together, and then zoom back out again. Or you could keep some of the kids with you and reteach just to them, and set the others off on their independent practice. That's a third kind of option that you've got there. But all three of those options, the one that you take is going to be dictated by the nature of the misconception that's presenting you, the nature of the misconception that's in front of you. So yeah, what do you think about that? Have I missed any out?
No, I don't think so. I really like that, because it's just very clear. Going back to your impact article, you talk about, specifically in your setting, the booklets you use and your teachers use, and the ability to, maybe at the beginning of the next lesson, the people who aren't misconcepted. I've just invented a word. There we are. Those people who are on the right tracks, they can get off with some independent practice, or maybe some planned retrieval on the stuff you've done it on a previous lesson. You can focus. The best person in the room, right? You, the teacher, the expert in the room, can focus intently on correcting those misconceptions. I also like the fact that if it's dictating so purely what's got to happen, if it's a total back to the drawing board, you can plan for that in detail.
Mm-hmm.
It doesn't have to be in that moment. You can be like, I need to put the brakes on right now. I think a lot of teachers forget that it's your room.
Mm-hmm.
Put the brake on, turn the engine off, take a breath.
Yeah, I think that sometimes we risk teachers not doing the thinking in classes. And I think that it's really important with something like misconceptions. Like, you're the one, as the teacher, that's going to be able to spot those misconceptions and dig for them and identify them. So therefore, the response to that should be entirely yours. And there's loads and loads of strategies that you can use to then respond. But the decision making over how to respond does need to absolutely sit with the class teacher, I think. And I guess if there's any leaders listening to this as well, it's about, I think that's where you can give your teachers agency. So, you set up, you can have as much prescription as you want, but if you're ultimately removing the agency of teachers to respond to what's in front of them, then just don't see how that's ever going to end up with the best learning going on in those rooms. So yeah, I think it's really important to kind of think about the options that you've got when you've spotted the misconception, and the fact that the misconception itself will dictate what happens next. And I guess to add to that as well, it's the reality that you're going to find tons and tons of different misconceptions all happening at the same time on the same concept. So like, at any given time in a class, even when you start teaching a particular topic or a new concept, because kids have got so many have got such a wide breadth of unshared experience, right? Maybe they've all had different teachers in the past, or maybe they've just got different experiences themselves that have informed their understanding of a particular concept or their conception of that particular concept. Then at any given time, you've got lots and lots of different understandings of the same thing. And this isn't about making sure that everybody has got an identical understanding. It's about making sure that everyone's understanding fits within your acceptable parameters of the understanding of that particular concept. And that's a really subtle difference. So it's not like you're trying to, I guess it's like if you think of like a dartboard, it's not trying to make sure that everybody's understanding fits into the bullseye. It's trying to make sure that everybody's understanding fits within the part of the board that you're willing to accept as acceptable in terms of an understanding of that particular concept. Probably not a very, very great analogy on reflection, but the idea is there.
No, I like that. No, I think that's quite clear. So just before we head to kind of our fourth and final point, number one, that learning is invisible, and that the teachers can feel great after a lesson, but they get that pure deflation later on in the test if it hasn't gone as they thought. Point two is that misconceptions can be easily concealed, so we really have to go digging for them.
They can be concealed.
And then
the
third point, which we've been looking at, is which I had thought about, but like not actively until this morning, and the fact that correct answers and that instant gratification is like, yes, they've got it, but it's that testing it later on where it might fall down. So then I'm panicking. Like, okay, I really need to, that lesson needs to go really, really well, and I need to find these. And that's point three, isn't it? Once you have found them, they dictate to you what you do next. Do you crack on? Do you reteach? Is it the same approach? But you were saying that it's a definite mindset shift, and that's really, really important. Number four, then, where are we for our final point?
Yeah, so the fourth reason that we think misconceptions are worth your time is because really closely related concepts are really easily overgeneralized. So this is the idea that when you've got two concepts that are different but very, very similar, the brain's automatic instinct is to generalize them together as the same thing. So like I was talking fairly recently at the University of York with this amazing group of MFL teacher trainees, and they were absolutely brilliant. And one of the examples for this that we came up with together was a jaguar and a cheetah. And like a jaguar and a cheetah look really, really similar. Okay, so because they are so similar, they're really easily generalized, and that's why often people can confuse the two, because they're just going, well, it's both of them are a cheetah, because the brain wants to generalize them together and see them as the same thing. Another place that you often get, so I'm a primary teacher, so another two concepts that are kind of closely related but different would be like fractions and ratio. So any year 6 teacher that's ever taught ratio will know the pain of trying to get kids to undo this idea that fractions and ratio are the same thing. Fraction being part of a whole and ratio being part and part. And that's really, really difficult to get kids to see the difference of that, because their brains automatically want to generalize and make a connection. And there's nothing you can do to stop that generalization from happening. And actually, it's a really important thing to do. And it's there's loads of learning gains that you can get from that if you tap into it properly. But it can also cause a bit of a problem when you've got concepts that are so closely related. And that's where interleaving comes in really, really useful. So we recently did a review of Jay Pearce and Isaac Moore's book, Desirable Difficulties in Action. And they make the point so well in that if you've got two concepts that are really easily confusable because they are so closely related, teach them really close together, and therefore you're able to zone in on the bit of the concept that's different. And I think that's another really, really important reason as to why misconceptions are so worth your time, because if you've got two closely related concepts, it's likely that you're going to end up with a misconception that they are the same thing.
And so with my brain and linking things together, quite ironically, we were chatting about Azubel. And the link to him. So where does his kind of meaningful learning in action spill over into this?
Well, I think so with Azubel, what he writes about, and again, for anyone that wants to read a little bit more about that, you can absolutely read Azubel's work from the 60s, but you could also read Sarah Cottingham's Azubel's Meaningful Learning in Action, which is I think 2022, 2023. Which is one of the In Action series books, which is a fantastic read of that if you want a really good summary of that research. But ultimately, the idea is that when you teach something new, you need to explicitly relate it to what kids already know. So you've got Sarah Cottingham draws this Venn diagram, and she goes, okay, so one part of the Venn diagram is what you already know, another part of the Venn diagram is this new knowledge, and where they intersect and overlap, that creates the middle bit of the Venn diagram, and that's the new understanding. But then what she goes on to say is that over time, kids will generalize those two concepts. And so the two circles of the Venn diagram will gradually merge into one. And what ends up happening there is that the original understanding almost envelops the new understanding, and it's just seen as the exact same thing. So it's been completely over assimilated and generalized together as one concept. And so the task of teachers there is to continually try and pull those two concepts back apart again and draw the attention back to the middle bit of the Venn diagram, which is the new understanding. So just a bit where the two concepts overlap, because that is that kind of new understanding bit. It might be worth maybe if I try an English example as well, right? So if you've got two words that are really closely related, but importantly different. So something like two words like intimidating and shocking, right? So this is actually one that I had fairly recently in a class I was teaching. So I taught the difference between intimidating and shocking, and then one of the kids had written this sentence, right? So with pungent breath and a giant structure, with pungent breath and a giant stature, the beast cast a shocking shadow over him. It's like, okay, it's not like intimidating would have been a much better word there, but he's gone for shocking because he's kind of confused the fact or generalized shocking and intimidating together as being direct synonyms, so meaning exactly the same thing. And he's not got the subtlety of the difference between the two words. So even though they're closely related, they are importantly different. And he's not quite got the difference bit, or perhaps had the difference, but then over time, the difference has been enveloped into the similarity. And so he's kind of grown to know those two words as meaning the same thing. And I think if you map that back onto this thing of misconceptions, that then looks like a misconception around, he just doesn't know the meaning of the word shocking. So, well, no, he does, but okay, he doesn't, but he's over assimilated it with the meaning of the word intimidating, and he's generalized them together, and he's using them completely interchangeably. So the nature of the misconception gets revealed if you understand more about where it's come from. And in this case, it's come from an overgeneralization of two related concepts.
Yeah, I love that. That's really, really clear. I must also as well give you the award for making clear on a podcast what a Venn diagram looks like to everyone listening out there. I could see it in front of me. It was very well described. Well done. No, I love that, particularly with the complete assimilation. Like it's you get that so often. You get that in music, actually, particularly when you are teaching time signatures. That's to say how many beats of what type of beat are in each bar. So most commonly used is 4/4. So that's the 4 on the top stands for the quantity, and the number underneath is of what type of beat. So a 4 stands for a crotchet, which is a 1 beat. So you're going to have 4 of them, or at least 4 to the value of. And you're like, right, okay, well, this is a bit confusing. And the American system's brilliant because they call them quarter notes, which is where we get the 4 from. But kind of over this neck of the woods of the world, it's a beat. We don't call a crotchet a quarter note. We call it 1 beat. So these two concepts have to be separate because they mean different things, but the assimilation of those two, they just crush each other and that leads to actually not acquisition of knowledge. It leads to complete decimation of the knowledge, because then you say, well, 3/4 is how many crotchet beats in a bar, and they go, well, that's 3/4, 3/4, and it's not maths, it's not a fraction, and then it's a Venn diagram of almost maybe 4 or 5 pieces that you've got to keep pulling apart to continually make sure that the new knowledge is being maintained, not completely assimilated, but subsumed, destroyed by all the other knowledge. And if there's any music teachers out there, they'll know that struggle, particularly with the advent of social media at the moment, because not that social media has just been created, but with videos like on TikTok and YouTube where our young people are learning to play piano convincingly proficiently. So there's kind of like, it looks and sounds really good because they're playing loud and hard and fast, but the knowledge of what they're doing isn't there because they've just kind of learnt this skill just by watching it and not really understanding the knowledge. With that, you aren't able to unpack that, and they're listening to a lot of American videos, and we're gonna let's do some eighth notes now. Now over here we call those quavers. In the States they call them eighth notes. Now eighth notes make sense because if you've got a time signature in music about quavers, the bottom number is an 8. Like, why don't we use that system over here? It makes so much sense. But we do have a very different system here that has also got to be taught. So you're right, pulling those things apart is, if you aren't aware that that's what you're doing and you're struggling, I'm having to keep reteaching this. Maybe you're not, what you're doing isn't reteaching, you're trying to pull apart conceptions that have been smashed together in a really unattractive way.
Yeah, I think it's important to make the point that like there's a massive opportunity to teach something well by relating it to other related concepts. So like you do want kids to see the relationship between the different concepts, but you just don't want them to over assimilate those and see them as exactly the same thing. And that's a really difficult balance to get. But if you can get it, then you're going to avoid them having the misconception that these two concepts are the same thing, and B, get the learning gain that comes from having them understand that these two concepts are related. So yeah, difficult balance to get, but worth getting.
Yeah, it all stems back to that. Yeah, it all stems back to that idea that there's nothing more important you can know about the people in front of you than what they already know. Trying to assess their prior knowledge to create the new links. It just becomes so important, particularly when framed through misconceptions. So I know we had a bit of a chat and we've got some strategies about how to kind of mitigate this. So do you want to kick us off with some strategies that you think really work?
Yeah, I think like in terms of strategy, I think there's sort of two ways that are quite helpful to think about it, right? So you can think about strategies that will actually reveal the misconception in themselves. So what are you gonna do as the teacher that's actually going to reveal those misconceptions. But then there's also thinking about strategies that you can build into your initial teaching, which are based on predicting that a misconception will be there. So maybe let's start with that one, right? So the idea of like teaching to a misconception. And if you're early on in your career, you don't have to kind of work out from nowhere what these misconceptions are likely to be. Like speak to your more experienced colleagues, work out from them what their experience is. When you've taught this thing before, what are the most common misconceptions? And then teach directly to them. So that kids, so that you're meeting those misconceptions or those most likely misconceptions head on. And one really effective way that you can do that is by using examples and non-examples to exemplify the misconception in relation to the correct understanding. So, like, if I give an example of that's and this is taken, I believe this is taken from Cognitive Load Theory in Action by Ollie Lovell. But I may not be 100% accurate on that, but I'm pretty sure that that's where this example comes from. So Ollie has a grey box that sits on a line in the book, and he goes, "Okay, this is grey." Okay, so and you got to imagine here that this is being taught to like an alien who's has never come to this planet before. So you've got this grey box that's sat on the line, and then he goes, "Okay, so this is grey," and then the next picture is a white box that is sat on the line. And he says, "This is grey." Okay, so at the moment, you've got two potential conceptions of what grey is. You've got the fact that the idea that grey is the colour, or that grey is a box sat on a line. So both of those at the moment are plausible because, from the two examples that have been given so far, you can deduce either of those things. Then the third picture is a grey box that's floating above the line. He goes, "This is also grey." So because the difference is because the difference has been really, really carefully planned for in each of those examples, the person looking at that has got no other conclusion to draw other than grey being the colour and therefore not related to either the shape or the relationship between the shape and the line. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does. Yeah.
So that would be this idea of teaching using examples and non-examples to really highlight the potential misconceptions and the differences between the misconceptions and the correct conceptions, if you like. And that's, I guess, it's the idea that you want to be teaching about the difference rather than the similarity. So if you're concerned about a particular misconception, teaching to the difference between two potential understandings of the same thing, or teaching to the difference between two closely related ideas or concepts, that's going to be more effective for you than teaching to the similarity. But it's also counterintuitive because it's more natural to kind of think, oh, well, these two things are really closely linked. Let me teach about the similarity between them. But no, the learning will come from teaching to the difference. And I think that's when you're thinking about planning to address misconceptions and how you're going to do that within your actual teaching within the lesson, I think it's really important to think about, right, how am I going to direct the kids' attention towards the difference between these two concepts, because they're naturally going to be drawn towards the similarity. Some people talk about element interactivity, and I forget that, again, I'm not doing very well this morning with citations, but I forget the study where I've read this, but people talk about elements and interactivity. So in that example, you've got the element of the colour, the element of the shape of the box, and the element of the line. And the interactivity between those elements is, you've got the colour sits inside the box, which sits on top of the line, or which floats above the line. And so if you can direct kids' attention to the part of the interactivity that is different between each of the examples, then you're going to get them to understand where the parameters of that concept sit and where the divisions between one concept and the next sit. Because, like I say, in that instance, you could end up with, or in that example, you could end up with the misconception that grey is a box sat on top of the line, and that the colour doesn't actually matter. And if you only went with the first two examples there, that's what you would end up with. But that third example of the grey box floating above the line makes the point that actually the only thing that is consistent across all of these examples is this colour. So therefore, grey must refer to the colour.
Element interactivity, by the way, was Sweller in 2010.
Oh, there you go. Nice. Thank you very much. So, all right. So then let's talk about strategies for actually revealing misconceptions. So those are strategies we talked about there to help you think about how you can teach two misconceptions. But when you want to be responsive in the moment, you've got to have strategies there that you can use that will help you reveal them on a kind of mechanical level. So you've got lots and lots of different strategies that you can use there, and there's like a plethora of resources out there, from things like walkthroughs and Teach Like a Champion and Step Lab, that have got loads and loads, like libraries of different strategies, and loads of support for you there as well on how to use those strategies to strategically reveal misconceptions. So some of them, for example, the use of mini whiteboards or cold calling, those are two that are really, really popular. And I think the first point I would make is try to match the strategy to the purpose of what you're trying to reveal, but also the features of the moment as well. So as an example, if you're asking a question that is going to take that's going to require an elaborate answer, so maybe it's a question that's where you want to really unpick kids' thinking and their justifications and their reasoning for something. Using mini whiteboards for that might not be the best strategy. Reason being, and I've seen this happen. So a teacher asks a big open-ended question that requires lots of justification from kids around to kind of really unpack their thinking. Brilliant question being asked as well. But they want the kids to then write their answers on the mini whiteboard. So they give them 2 or 3 minutes to do that, and then they go, show me. And they put the whiteboards under their chins, and then the teacher's then trying to take in, let's say all of the kids in the class have written like 3 sentences. The teacher's then trying to take in and evaluate the accuracy of 90 sentences in a moment, which is just not doable.
Yeah.
And so in that instance, even though the strategy of using the mini whiteboard to try and reveal the misconceptions in theory is a good one, it doesn't always work. It's not always the best strategy to use, dependent on what you're actually trying to reveal. So in that situation, a better strategy might be to use some think, pair, share, and maybe give them like a sentence stem to get them going, to make sure that everybody's talking on the right thing, on the right topic, and then make sure you're doing circulation to listen into what kids are saying, and then get feedback from that afterwards. But of course, there are other times where you would want to use a mini whiteboard. So, for example, I did one in year 1 fairly recently, where we were talking about which of these 4 is not an animal. So we had fish, monkey, snake, and teddy bear, and I kind of lettered them A, B, C, or D. Okay, show me which one you think is not an animal. And it was quite effective, because all it took was a quick scan around the room, and I'm not looking for how many kids got the right answer. I'm looking for how many kids got the wrong answer. So I'm scanning. So in this instance, D was the right answer. So I'm looking for how many A's, how many B's, how many C's. And then I'm going, okay, there's lots of A's. I can't remember which one it was, but fish was the one that came up, was the incorrect answer that came up the most. So then in my head, I'm then thinking, okay, fish. It's likely that they think fish is not an animal, because fishes live in water, and the others all live on land. Theoretically, a teddy bear lives on land. So therefore, I knew what the likely misconception was, and I could then respond to that. But the idea being here, and the really important bit of this, is that I've matched the strategy to the purpose. So I'd pre-planned in specific misconceptions to the 3 incorrect answers. And so when I saw that fish was the most common incorrect answer, I knew that in all likelihood it was probably because they thought that animals have to live on land. So there's a certain amount of planning that goes into that as well. But the response element to it is the fact that, okay, what am I then going to do about that if that one ends up being the one that's most common? And I was able to then respond to it with my explanation and draw kids' attention to the fact that lots of animals do actually live off land.
Yeah, great. So many learning points from that kind of one test of misconception. Very, very clever, Mr. Colbeck. I like that.
Just lots of trial and error over the years, and it's nice if people can kind of cut out some of that trial and error from other people's experience, I suppose. And I think there's probably not as much of that as what we could have in teaching, whereby there's so many mistakes that so many of us who have been doing it for quite a long time have made, that if we can pass those likely mistakes down, and they can be made a little bit less often by newer teachers, then all the better, I guess. I think it's important to kind of try and make a little bit more even of a concrete distinction between those 2 types of strategy for revealing those misconceptions. So like the first one, where I was saying that you're better off probably using some paired talk time and then getting some feedback from it. I think I would almost class that as like a process misconception. So you're trying to uncover if there are any misconceptions in the process understanding of the children. Whereas with the one where I'm using a multiple choice question on the board, I would class that, I guess, as a feature misconception. So that's not anything particularly scientific. That's just something I've just come up with off the top of my head now. So there could be, you could classify misconceptions in hundreds and thousands of different ways. But in those 2 examples, if I'm trying to characterize what those misconceptions are, or what those misconceptions could be, the second one, I guess, would be like a feature misconception. So the features of an animal. So because it's a feature misconception, I think that using a multiple choice question like that is an efficient way of quickly revealing what that misconception is. Whereas with the first example I gave, because it's more of a process misconception, then it fits more with having the opportunity to talk about the process and to reason about the process. So I guess the really key message from that is to be really conscious of the type of misconception you're looking for, and then match your strategy for how best to reveal that type of misconception. Yeah,
I think that's brilliant and really sound advice to end our little episode on. Thank you very much for all the work you put into that, Adam. It's absolutely fascinating, and going to be heading back into the classroom on Monday, hunting for those misconceptions and trying to be aware of what type they are, and see if we can't maybe prevent some pain points in the future.
Yeah, they're there hiding away from you, but they're there, no doubt.
We will catch them all. All right, mate, thank you very much. I'll catch you next time.
Nice one. Look forward to it.
We'll be back soon with more conversations and advice for those of you starting your teaching career, and head-nodding moments with our special guests. As ever, please head over to Twitter and join in the conversation at EduPulse Co, and we'll see you next time.